Veronica Blake was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone stop what they were doing. She wasn't just beautiful, she was mesmerizing. Her long dark hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall of silk, and her piercing green eyes seemed to look right through you, as if she could see every secret you were trying to hide. Her smile? It wasn't just a smile, it was a weapon. It could disarm even the most guarded man, leaving him vulnerable and willing to do anything just to see it again. But behind that angelic face was a mind sharper than a razor and a heart as cold as the Arctic. Veronica grew up in a small, forgotten town in the Midwest, a place where dreams went to die. Her father was a factory worker who drank too much, and her mother was a waitress who never stopped complaining about the life she never had. From a young age, Veronica knew she was different. She wasn't like the other girls in her town who dreamed of marrying the high school quarterback and settling down in a two-bedroom house with a white picket fence. No, Veronica wanted more. She wanted everything. By the time she was 16, she had already learned how to use her looks to get what she wanted. Teachers gave her better grades, boys bought her gifts, and even her mother's boyfriends couldn't help but sneak glances at her when they thought no one was looking. Veronica didn't just crave attention, she thrived on it. But she wasn't just a pretty face, she was smart, dangerously smart. She knew how to read people, how to manipulate them, how to make them think they were the ones in control when in reality, she was pulling all the strings. After graduating high school, Veronica left her small town without looking back. She moved to Los Angeles, the city of dreams, where she quickly learned that beauty was a currency. And she was rich. She started working as a cocktail waitress at an upscale bar in Beverly Hills, where she rubbed shoulders with the city's elite. Wealthy businessmen, Hollywood producers, and even a few politicians became regulars at the bar, all of them drawn to Veronica like moths to a flame. She knew how to play the game, how to make them feel special, how to make them believe that they were the only ones who mattered. But Veronica never gave anything away for free. Every smile, every laugh, every touch of her hand came with a price. It wasn't long before Veronica realized that she didn't just want to be around money, she wanted to control it. She started dating a wealthy real estate developer named Richard Carter, a man twice her age with a net worth in the millions. Richard was smitten with her, showering her with expensive gifts and taking her on trips to exotic locations. But Veronica didn't love Richard. She loved what he could give her. And when he started to run out of things to give, she moved on to her next target. Veronica wasn't just a gold digger, she was a predator. She had an uncanny ability to spot weakness in people, to find the cracks in their armor and exploit them. She didn't care who she hurt or what she had to do to get what she wanted. To her, people were just pawns in a game, and she was always 3 steps ahead. But Veronica's ambitions didn't stop at money. She wanted power, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. That's when she met Ethan Cole, a career criminal with a reputation for being ruthless. Ethan was everything Veronica wasn't, rough around the edges, impulsive, and easily manipulated. Veronica saw him as the perfect partner in crime, someone who could do the dirty work while she pulled the strings from behind the scenes, and just like every other man who crossed her path, Ethan fell under her spell. Veronica Blake was a woman who could make you believe anything. She could make you believe she loved you, that she needed you, that you were the most important person in her life. But the truth was, Veronica didn't love anyone, not even herself. She was a master manipulator, a puppet master who used beauty and charm as her weapons of choice. And for those who got too close, the price of knowing her was often paid in blood. Veronica Blake didn't just want money, she wanted everything. For her, money was only the beginning. It was a tool, a stepping stone to something far greater, power. Real power, the kind of power that made people bend to your will, that made the world revolve around you. She didn't just want to live in luxury, she wanted to control the game, to be the one calling the shots. And she was willing to do whatever it took to get there. Growing up in a rundown town where the only thing people talked about was how to make it to the next paycheck, Veronica had learned early on that money was the key to freedom. She watched her parents fight over bills, saw her mother cry when the electricity got shut off, and heard her father curse the factory owner who paid him pennies for back-breaking work. Veronica swore to herself that she would never live like that. She wouldn't be trapped by poverty, by mediocrity, by the small-minded dreams of the people around her. She was destined for more. But for Veronica, money wasn't just about buying nice things, it was about what it represented. Money meant control. It meant never having to answer to anyone, never having to beg or compromise. It meant being untouchable. And Veronica didn't just want to be rich, she wanted to be feared. She wanted to walk into a room and know that everyone there was either in awe of her or terrified of her. She wanted to be the kind of person who could destroy someone's life with a single phone call. Her obsession with power started small. At first, it was just about getting what she wanted in the moment, a free drink, a ride home, a new pair of shoes. But as she got older, her ambitions grew. She realized that the world was full of people who were willing to give her anything she wanted, as long as she played her cards right. Men, in particular, were easy targets. They were predictable, driven by ego and desire, and Veronica knew exactly how to exploit that. She could make a man feel like a king one moment and a fool the next, all while keeping him wrapped around her finger. But Veronica wasn't satisfied with just taking from men. She wanted to own them. She wanted to turn them into her pawns, her soldiers in a war for power and dominance. She didn't just want their money, she wanted their loyalty, their obedience. She wanted them to do her bidding without question, to risk everything for her, even their lives. And the scariest part? She was good at it. Too good. When she moved to Los Angeles, Veronica quickly realized that the city was a playground for people like her. It was a place where ambition and greed ruled, where everyone was chasing something: fame, fortune, success. And Veronica knew how to use that to her advantage. She started targeting wealthy men, the kind who thought they were untouchable. She would charm them, seduce them, and then slowly, methodically, take everything they had. But she didn't stop there. Veronica wasn't content with just being a gold digger. She wanted to build an empire. Her first big score came when she met Richard Carter, a real estate mogul with a net worth in the millions. Richard was everything Veronica looked for in a target: rich, arrogant, and desperate for attention. She played the role of the perfect girlfriend, showering him with affection and making him feel like the most important man in the world. In return, Richard gave her access to his world, his money, his connections, his secrets. But Veronica didn't just want to live off Richard's wealth, she wanted to control it. She convinced him to invest in a series of shady business deals that she secretly orchestrated to fail. By the time Richard realized what was happening, it was too late. His fortune was gone, and Veronica had disappeared, leaving him to pick up the pieces. But Richard was just the beginning. Veronica's appetite for power grew with every conquest. She started setting her sights on bigger targets, men with influence, men who could open doors for her, men who could help her climb the ladder of power. She didn't care if they were married, if they had families, if they were good or bad people. To her, they were all the same, tools to be used and discarded. Veronica's ultimate goal was to become untouchable. She wanted to be the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone else feel small. She wanted to be the one pulling the strings, the one who decided who succeeded and who failed. And she was willing to do whatever it took to get there. Lies, manipulation, betrayal, nothing was off limits. If someone got in her way, she would destroy them without a second thought. And if someone was useful to her, she would keep them around just long enough to serve their purpose. But Veronica's hunger for power wasn't just about ambition. It was about survival. Deep down, she was still that little girl from the Midwest, terrified of being powerless, of being trapped in a life she didn't want. Power was her way of protecting herself, of making sure that no one could ever hurt her or control her again. And as long as she had that, she didn't care who she had to step on to keep it. Veronica Blake wasn't just chasing money or power. She was chasing freedom. The freedom to live life on her own terms, to take what she wanted without asking for permission. And for her, there was no such thing as too far. The world was hers for the taking, and she wasn't going to stop until she had it all. The first victim, a wealthy businessman. Richard Carter was the kind of man who thought he had it all figured out. In his late 40s, he was a self-made millionaire, a real estate mogul who had built his empire from the ground up. He owned luxury properties across Los Angeles, drove a sleek black Aston Martin, and lived in a sprawling Beverly Hills mansion that screamed success. To the outside world, Richard was the epitome of the American dream, a man who had worked hard, played harder, and come out on top. But beneath the polished exterior, Richard was lonely. Divorced twice, with no children and a string of failed relationships behind him, he was desperate for something, or someone, to fill the void in his life. And that's when Veronica Blake walked in. They met at an exclusive rooftop bar in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of place where the drinks cost more than most people's weekly groceries, and the clientele was a mix of celebrities, CEOs, and social climbers. Veronica was sitting at the bar, sipping a martini, her emerald green dress hugging her curves in all the right places. She looked like she belonged there, like she was born to be surrounded by wealth and luxury. Richard noticed her immediately. How could he not? She was stunning, magnetic, the kind of woman who could make a man forget his own name. Veronica didn't approach Richard right away. She let him come to her, playing the part of the mysterious beauty who didn't need anyone's attention but somehow commanded it anyway. When he finally worked up the courage to introduce himself, she greeted him with a smile that could melt steel. She laughed at his jokes, complimented his watch, and listened intently as he talked about his business ventures. By the end of the night, Richard was hooked. He felt like he had just met the woman of his dreams. But Veronica wasn't interested in Richard's dreams. She was interested in his bank account. She saw him for what he was, a lonely, insecure man who was desperate to feel important, and she knew exactly how to make him feel that way. Over the next few weeks, Veronica and Richard became inseparable. She played the role of the perfect girlfriend, showering him with affection and making him feel like the most important man in the world. She laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. She listened to his stories, even when they bored her. She made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Richard, for his part, was smitten. He couldn't believe his luck. Here was this beautiful, intelligent, charming woman who seemed to genuinely care about him. He started spoiling her with expensive gifts, designer handbags, diamond jewelry, trips to Paris and Dubai. He introduced her to his friends and business associates, proudly showing her off as if she were a trophy. But what Richard didn't realize was that Veronica wasn't just after his money. She was after his trust. It started small. Veronica would casually mention a business idea she had, something she thought could be really lucrative, if only she had the capital to get it off the ground. Richard, eager to impress her, offered to invest. At first it was just a few $1,000s, pocket change for a man like him. But as their relationship progressed, Veronica's requests became bolder. She convinced Richard to invest in a series of real estate deals promising huge returns. What Richard didn't know was that these deals were nothing more than elaborate scams, carefully orchestrated by Veronica to funnel money into her own accounts. By the time Richard started to suspect that something was wrong, it was too late. His bank accounts were drained, his properties were tied up in fraudulent contracts, and his reputation in the business world was in shambles. Veronica, of course, was nowhere to be found. She had disappeared without a trace, leaving Richard to pick up the pieces of his ruined life. The fallout was devastating. Richard lost everything: his money, his business, his home. He became a cautionary tale, a once powerful man brought to his knees by his own greed and naivety. But for Veronica, Richard was just the beginning. He was her first big score, the first step in her journey to power and dominance. And as she moved on to her next target, she didn't feel a shred of guilt. To her, Richard was just another pawn in the game, another stepping stone on her path to the top. Veronica's ability to manipulate Richard wasn't just about her looks, though they certainly played a role. It was about her understanding of human nature, her ability to read people and exploit their weaknesses. She knew that Richard's wealth wasn't enough to make him happy, that he craved validation and connection, and she gave him exactly what he wanted, until she didn't. In the end, Richard Carter wasn't just a victim of Veronica Blake. He was a victim of his own desires, his own need to feel important, his own belief that he could have it all. And for Veronica, he was proof that her methods worked, that she could take down even the most powerful men if she played her cards right. Richard's story serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths Veronica was willing to go to achieve her goals. She didn't just ruin his life, she destroyed his sense of self, leaving him a broken man who would never fully recover. And as she moved on to her next victim, she did so with the confidence of someone who knew she was unstoppable. For Veronica Blake, Richard Carter was just the beginning. Meeting the accomplice, a dangerous criminal. Ethan Cole was the kind of man you cross the street to avoid. He had a reputation that preceded him, a reputation built on violence, intimidation, and a complete disregard for the law. In his early 30s, Ethan was a career criminal, a man who had spent more time in back alleys and underground poker games than he had in the daylight. He wasn't just dangerous, he thrived on danger. With a lean, muscular frame covered in tattoos and a pair of cold, calculating eyes, Ethan was the embodiment of trouble. He was the kind of man who didn't just break the rules, he rewrote them to suit his needs. And when Veronica Blake met him, she knew she had found the perfect partner in crime. Their paths crossed in a dimly lit dive bar on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a place where the drinks were cheap, the music was loud, and the clientele was as shady as they came. Veronica wasn't there by accident. She had heard whispers about Ethan, a man who could get things done, no questions asked. She had been looking for someone like him, someone who could handle the dirty work while she stayed in the shadows, pulling the strings. And when she saw him sitting in the corner, nursing a whiskey and glaring at anyone who dared to look his way, she knew she had found her man. Ethan wasn't like the wealthy businessmen Veronica usually targeted. He wasn't impressed by her beauty or her charm. In fact, when she approached him, he barely looked up from his drink. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like someone who had smoked one too many cigarettes. But Veronica wasn't deterred. She saw the potential in him, the raw power, the ruthlessness. She knew that if she could win him over, he would be an invaluable asset. "I hear you're good at solving problems," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Ethan raised an eyebrow, finally giving her his full attention. "Depends on the problem," he replied, his tone laced with suspicion. Veronica smiled, leaning in just enough to make him curious. "Let's just say I have a proposition, something that could make us both very rich." Ethan wasn't the type to trust easily, but there was something about Veronica that intrigued him. She wasn't like the other women he had met. Women who were either too scared of him or too desperate to use him. Veronica was different. She was confident, calculating, and completely unafraid. She spoke to him like an equal, like someone who understood the darkness inside him because she had it inside her too. And as she laid out her plan, a series of high-stakes heists targeting wealthy businessmen and corrupt politicians, Ethan couldn't help but be impressed. She wasn't just ambitious, she was brilliant. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he had met someone who could match him. Someone who could push him to be even more dangerous than he already was. Their partnership was born that night, sealed with a handshake and a shared understanding that neither of them would hesitate to betray the other if it came down to it. But for now, they needed each other. Veronica had the brains, the connections, and the ability to manipulate people into doing what she wanted. Ethan had the muscle, the street smarts, and the willingness to get his hands dirty. Together, they were unstoppable. Ethan quickly became Veronica's enforcer, the man who carried out her plans with ruthless efficiency. He was the one who intimidated their targets, who made sure no one dared to cross them. But he wasn't just a hired thug. Ethan was smart, resourceful, and surprisingly loyal for now. He admired Veronica's ambition, her ability to see the big picture, and her refusal to let anyone stand in her way. And while he knew she was using him, he didn't care. He was using her too. Their first job together was a test of their partnership. Veronica had identified a wealthy tech entrepreneur who was laundering money through offshore accounts. She convinced the man to meet her at a private club, where she charmed him into revealing just enough information for Ethan to track down his assets. A week later, the man woke up to find his accounts emptied, and a threatening note left on his doorstep. The message was clear: don't go to the police or else. The heist was a success, and the payout was more than either of them had expected. But more importantly, it proved that they worked well together. Veronica was the mastermind, and Ethan was the executioner. As their partnership grew, so did their ambitions. They moved from small-time scams to elaborate schemes that required meticulous planning and flawless execution. Veronica would identify the targets, men and women who were rich, powerful, and corrupt enough that no one would feel sorry for them when they lost everything. Ethan would handle the logistics, assembling a team of criminals who were as ruthless and efficient as he was. Together they built an empire of crime, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. But their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Ethan was a man who thrived on chaos, who lived for the thrill of the moment. Veronica, on the other hand, was a perfectionist who demanded control over every detail. They clashed often, their arguments fueled by their equally strong wills and their refusal to back down. But in a strange way, their conflicts only made their partnership stronger. They respected each other's strengths, even as they tested each other's limits. For Ethan, Veronica was more than just a partner. She was a force of nature, a woman who could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. He admired her, even as he feared her. He knew that she was dangerous, that she would betray him in a heartbeat if it served her purposes. But he also knew that he couldn't walk away from her. She was the first person who had ever made him feel like he was part of something bigger than himself, like he was more than just a thug with a bad reputation. For Veronica, Ethan was a means to an end. She didn't trust him, and she never would. But she valued him, not just for his skills, but for his loyalty, however temporary it might be. She knew that as long as their goals aligned, Ethan would do whatever it took to help her succeed, and for now, that was enough. Together, Veronica Blake and Ethan Cole were a deadly combination, a mastermind and a monster, a queen and her knight. They were unstoppable, unrelenting and utterly ruthless, and as they set their sights on their next target, they knew that nothing and no one could stand in their way. The first bank heist. The plan was flawless, or at least that's what Veronica Blake told Ethan Cole as they sat in the dimly lit back room of a rundown diner on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The air smelled of stale coffee and grease, but neither of them noticed. They were too focused, too consumed by the details of what would be their most ambitious crime yet, robbing a bank. Not just any bank, though. Veronica had chosen her target carefully, as she always did. This wasn't about walking into some random branch and grabbing whatever cash was in the drawers. No, this was about making a statement. It was about power, control, and of course, a massive payday. The target was Pacific Union Bank, a mid-sized but well-established institution known for catering to wealthy clients. Veronica had done her homework. She knew the bank's layout, its security protocols, and even the names of the employees who worked there. She had spent weeks gathering intel, posing as a potential client to gain access to restricted areas and charming the bank manager into revealing more than he should have. By the time she and Ethan sat down to finalize the plan, she knew the bank better than the people who worked there. "This isn't just about the money," Veronica said, her green eyes gleaming with excitement as she spread a blueprint of the bank across the table. "It's about sending a message. We're not amateurs, we're professionals, and after this, everyone will know it." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he studied the blueprint. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Banks are a whole different game. You screw this up, and it's not just the cops you've got to worry about. The feds will be all over us." Veronica smirked, her confidence unshaken. "That's why we won't screw it up. I've thought of everything, the timing, the escape routes, even the distractions. All you have to do is follow the plan." The plan was as bold as it was intricate. Veronica had divided the heist into 3 phases: infiltration, execution, and escape. Each phase was meticulously planned, with every detail accounted for. She had even recruited a small team of accomplices, hand-picked by Ethan, who specialized in everything from hacking to explosives. It was a high-risk, high-reward operation, and everyone involved knew that failure wasn't an option. The day of the heist dawned bright and sunny, an ironic contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold. Veronica and Ethan arrived separately, blending in with the morning crowd as they made their way to the bank. Veronica was dressed in a tailored business suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She looked every bit the part of a high-powered executive, and no one gave her a second glance as she walked through the front doors. Ethan, on the other hand, was stationed outside in a nondescript van, monitoring the situation through a series of cameras that their hacker had installed earlier in the week. Phase 1, infiltration, went off without a hitch. Veronica approached the teller with a warm smile, handing over a forged ID and a set of documents that claimed she was there to access a safety deposit box. The teller, a young woman who looked like she was barely out of college, didn't suspect a thing. Within minutes, Veronica was escorted to the vault, where she planted a small device designed to disable the bank's alarm system. Meanwhile, one of their accomplices, posing as a delivery driver, slipped into the staff entrance and secured the back door for the rest of the team. Phase 2, execution, was where things got dangerous. At exactly 10:15 a.m., Ethan and 2 other accomplices stormed into the bank wearing masks and brandishing weapons. The customers screamed, the employees froze, and the security guard, an older man who looked like he was counting down the days to retirement, was disarmed before he even had a chance to react. Ethan's voice boomed through the lobby as he barked orders, his presence commanding and terrifying. "Nobody move! Hands where I can see them! If you cooperate, no one gets hurt!" Veronica, still in the vault, played her part perfectly. She pretended to be a terrified customer, cowering in the corner as Ethan and his team forced the bank manager to open the vault. Inside they found exactly what Veronica had promised: stacks of cash, gold bars, and even a few high-value items from the safety deposit boxes. It was a treasure trove, and Ethan couldn't help but grin as he stuffed the loot into duffel bags. But Veronica wasn't just after the money. She had a secondary objective, one she hadn't shared with the rest of the team. Among the safety deposit boxes was one that belonged to a prominent politician, a man with a lot to lose if certain documents ever saw the light of day. Veronica had discovered this during her reconnaissance, and she knew that those documents were worth more than all the cash in the vault combined. While the others were focused on the money, she discreetly pocketed the files, her mind already racing with plans for how to use them. Phase 3, escape, was the most critical part of the plan. Veronica and Ethan had mapped out multiple escape routes, each designed to throw off the authorities. As the team exited the bank, they set off a series of smoke bombs, creating chaos and confusion in the surrounding area. By the time the police arrived, the team was already gone, splitting up and disappearing into the city like ghosts. The heist was a success, at least on the surface. The team walked away with over $2 million in cash and valuables, and the authorities had no leads. But for Veronica, the real victory wasn't the money. It was the power. The heist had proven that she could outsmart the system, that she could orchestrate a crime so audacious that it left everyone else scrambling to catch up. And with the documents she had stolen, she now had leverage over one of the most powerful men in the city. For Ethan, the heist was a rush, a reminder of why he had chosen this life in the first place. But even as he celebrated their success, he couldn't shake the feeling that Veronica was playing a game he didn't fully understand. She was always one step ahead, always thinking 3 moves in advance. And while he admired her brilliance, he also feared it. Because if there was one thing Ethan knew for sure, it was that Veronica Blake didn't do anything without a reason. And whatever her reason was, it was bigger than any of them realized. The first bank heist was just the beginning. For Veronica, it was a stepping stone to something far greater. For Ethan, it was a reminder of the risks they were taking. And for everyone else, it was a warning. Veronica Blake and Ethan Cole were a force to be reckoned with, and they were just getting started. Another victim, a murdered police officer. The murder of Officer Daniel Hayes wasn't part of the plan. At least that's what Veronica Blake told herself as she stared at the blood-stained floor of the abandoned warehouse where it had all gone wrong. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had set the wheels in motion, and now there was no turning back. This wasn't just a robbery gone bad or a simple mistake. This was murder. Cold, calculated, and irreversible. And for the first time, Veronica felt the weight of what she had done, or rather, what she had allowed to happen. Officer Hayes was a good man. Everyone who knew him said so. He was the kind of cop who still believed in justice, who thought he could make a difference in a city that seemed to be drowning in corruption and crime. At 35, he was a 10-year veteran of the LAPD, a husband and a father to 2 young daughters. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him. And on that fateful night, trouble came in the form of Veronica Blake and Ethan Cole. It started with a tip. Veronica and Ethan had just pulled off their first bank heist, and while the authorities had no solid leads, the pressure was mounting. The media was in a frenzy, calling it one of the most daring robberies in recent history. The police were desperate for answers, and Officer Hayes had been assigned to a task force investigating the case. He was good at his job. Too good. Within days, he had pieced together enough evidence to put him on Veronica and Ethan's trail. He didn't know their names yet, but he was getting close. Too close. Veronica had always prided herself on being one step ahead, but this time she had underestimated her opponent. Hayes wasn't like the other cops she had dealt with. He was relentless, methodical, and unwilling to back down. When he started asking questions at the wrong places and following the wrong people, Veronica knew she had to act. She couldn't afford to let him connect the dots. Not now. Not when she was so close to building the empire she had always dreamed of. At first she tried to handle it her way, subtly, without bloodshed. She sent Ethan to warn Hayes to scare him off the case. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man who did subtle. He was a hammer, not a scalpel, and when he confronted Hayes in a dark alley behind a bar, things escalated quickly. Hayes wasn't intimidated. He stood his ground, his hand hovering over the gun at his hip as he told Ethan to back off. But Ethan didn't back off. He never did. The fight was brutal and short. Hayes was strong, but Ethan was stronger. Within minutes the officer was on the ground, blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. Ethan could have walked away. He could have left Hayes there, bruised and battered but alive. But something inside him snapped. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the realization that Hayes wouldn't stop until he brought them down. Whatever it was, Ethan made a choice that would change everything. The gunshot echoed through the alley, sharp and final. Hayes didn't even have time to draw his weapon. He was dead before he hit the ground, his blood pooling beneath him as Ethan stood over his body, breathing heavily. For a moment there was silence, and then Ethan pulled out his phone and called Veronica. "It's done," he said. his voice cold and emotionless. "He's not going to be a problem anymore." Veronica didn't respond right away. She was sitting in her penthouse apartment, sipping a glass of red wine as she stared out at the city lights. She had known this was a possibility. She had even considered it briefly, when she first learned about Hayes. But hearing the words out loud made it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said the only thing she could. "Good, now clean it up." Ethan did as he was told. He wiped down the scene, disposed of the weapon, and made sure there was nothing to tie them to the murder. But no amount of cleaning could erase what had happened. Hayes was dead, and the city was in an uproar. The LAPD launched a full-scale investigation, vowing to bring his killer to justice. His face was plastered on every news channel, his story told and retold by grieving colleagues and tearful family members. He became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the city, a good man taken too soon by senseless violence. For Veronica, the murder was a turning point. It wasn't just about the money or the power anymore, it was about survival. She knew that the police wouldn't stop until they found Hayes' killer, and she knew that if they ever connected the dots, her empire would come crashing down. But instead of backing off, she doubled down. She became more ruthless, more calculating, more determined than ever to stay ahead of the game. If Hayes' death had taught her anything, it was that there was no room for weakness in her world. For Ethan, the murder was just another day on the job. He didn't lose sleep over it, didn't feel a shred of guilt. To him, Hayes was just another obstacle, another problem that needed solving. But even he couldn't ignore the tension that had started to build between him and Veronica. She was colder now, more distant. She didn't trust him the way she used to, and he could feel it. He didn't blame her. He didn't trust himself either. The murder of Officer Daniel Hayes was a tragedy, a senseless act of violence that left a family shattered and a city reeling. But for Veronica and Ethan, it was something else entirely. It was a reminder of the cost of their ambition, of the lengths they were willing to go to achieve their goals. And as they moved forward, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The line between right and wrong had been crossed, and there was no going back. Escalation of crime. The armored truck heist. The armored truck heist was a turning point for Veronica Blake and Ethan Cole. It wasn't just another job, it was a declaration of war against the system. By this point, they had already made a name for themselves in the criminal underworld. The bank heist had been a success, and the murder of Officer Daniel Hayes had only added to their notoriety. But Veronica wasn't satisfied. She never was. The money from the bank job was running low, and the heat from the police was growing stronger. They needed something big, something bold, something that would cement their reputation as untouchable. And Veronica had the perfect plan. The target was an armored truck belonging to Titan Security, one of the largest cash transport companies in the country. These trucks were fortresses on wheels, designed to withstand everything from small arms fire to explosives. But Veronica wasn't intimidated. She had spent weeks studying their routes, their schedules, and their security protocols. She knew when the trucks were most vulnerable, and she knew how to exploit that vulnerability. For her, it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that she could outsmart anyone, even a billion-dollar security company. The plan was as audacious as it was dangerous. Veronica had chosen a truck that was scheduled to make a pickup at a high-end casino in downtown Los Angeles. The casino was a cash-heavy operation, and the truck would be carrying millions of dollars by the time it left. But the real challenge wasn't getting to the money, it was getting away with it. Armored trucks were always accompanied by armed guards, and the police response time in the area was less than 5 minutes. If anything went wrong, they would be trapped. Veronica and Ethan spent weeks preparing. They recruited a team of specialists, each with a specific role to play. There was Marcus, the explosives expert, who had a knack for making things go boom without leaving a trace. Then there was Jenna, the getaway driver, a former street racer who could outmaneuver anyone on the road. And finally, there was Alex, the tech genius, who could hack into security systems and disable alarms with the push of a button. Together, they were a well-oiled machine, and Veronica was the mastermind pulling all the strings. The day of the heist was a study in controlled chaos. Veronica and Ethan arrived at the casino separately, blending in with the morning crowd. Veronica was dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair styled in loose waves, while Ethan wore a maintenance uniform that made him look like just another worker. Meanwhile, Marcus and Jenna waited in a stolen van a few blocks away, their nerves masked by the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Alex was stationed in a nearby apartment, his laptop open and his fingers flying across the keyboard as he monitored the casino's security cameras. Phase 1 of the plan was all about timing. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the armored truck pulled up to the casino's loading dock. Two guards stepped out, their hands resting on the holsters of their sidearms as they surveyed the area. Inside the casino, Veronica was already in position. She had charmed her way into the manager's office where she pretended to be a high-rolling client interested in booking a private event. As the manager gave her a tour of the facilities, she discreetly signaled Alex, who hacked into the casino's security system and disabled the cameras in the loading dock. Phase 2 was where things got dangerous. As the guards began loading cash into the truck, Marcus made his move. Disguised as a delivery driver, he approached the loading dock with a large package in his hands. Inside the package was a small but powerful explosive device designed to create a diversion without causing too much damage. Marcus placed the package near the truck and walked away, his heart pounding as he pressed the detonator. The explosion was loud enough to send the guards scrambling, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. But before they could react, Ethan and Jenna appeared, their faces hidden behind masks as they brandished assault rifles. "Drop your weapons!" Ethan barked, his voice cold and commanding. The guards hesitated for a moment, their training kicking in as they assessed the situation. But they were outnumbered and outgunned, and they knew it. Reluctantly, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Jenna quickly zip-tied their wrists and forced them to the ground, while Ethan opened the back of the truck and began loading the cash into duffel bags. Meanwhile, Veronica was still inside the casino, playing her part to perfection. She kept the manager distracted, her charm and wit keeping him oblivious to the chaos unfolding just outside. When the explosion rocked the building, she feigned surprise, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "What was that?" she asked, her voice laced with just the right amount of panic. The manager assured her that everything was fine and she nodded, pretending to believe him. But inside, she was already planning her next move. Phase 3 was the escape, and it was the most critical part of the plan. As Ethan and Jenna loaded the last of the cash into the van, Marcus set off another explosion, this time in the casino's parking garage. The second blast created even more chaos, drawing the attention of the police and giving the team the distraction they needed to make their getaway. Jenna floored the gas pedal, the van screeching out of the loading dock and onto the busy streets of downtown Los Angeles. Behind them, sirens wailed as police cars raced to the scene, but Jenna was already 3 steps ahead. She weaved through traffic with the precision of a surgeon, her hands steady on the wheel as she led the team to safety. By the time the police arrived at the casino, the team was long gone. They had switched vehicles in an underground parking lot, leaving the van and its incriminating evidence behind. Veronica and Ethan regrouped with the rest of the team at a safe house on the outskirts of the city, their adrenaline still pumping as they counted the money. The haul was even bigger than they had expected, over $5 million in cash, plus a few high-value items that Marcus had grabbed on his way out. For Veronica, the heist was a triumph. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the power, the control, the feeling of being untouchable. She had outsmarted the system once again and she knew that her reputation would only grow. But for Ethan, the heist was a reminder of how dangerous their game had become. The explosions, the guns, the close calls, it was all starting to take a toll. He didn't say anything though. He knew better than to question Veronica's plans. She was the mastermind, and he was just a piece on her chessboard. The armored truck heist was a success, but it came at a cost. The police were more determined than ever to catch them, and the team knew that their luck wouldn't last forever. But for now, they celebrated their victory, toasting to their success and dreaming of what they would do with their newfound wealth. For Veronica, it was just another step on her path to power. For Ethan, it was a reminder that the line between success and disaster was razor thin. And for everyone else, it was a warning. Veronica Blake and Ethan Cole were unstoppable, and they weren't done yet. The arrival of a new accomplice. The arrival of Lucas Kane was unexpected even for Veronica Blake. She had always been meticulous about who she let into her inner circle. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, and every member of her crew had been carefully vetted, their skills and loyalty tested before they were allowed to join her operations. But Lucas was different. He wasn't someone she had sought out. He had found her, and from the moment he walked into her life, everything changed. It started with a message, a simple, cryptic email that landed in Veronica's encrypted inbox late one night. The subject line read, "I know who you are." At first she thought it was a joke, some amateur hacker trying to scare her. But as she read the message, her blood ran cold. Whoever had sent it knew things. Details about the bank heist, the armored truck job, even the murder of Officer Hayes. Details that no one outside her crew should have known. The email ended with a proposition. Meet me, midnight, Pier 17. Come alone, I can help you. Veronica didn't like being cornered, and she didn't like surprises. But she also knew better than to ignore a threat. So at exactly midnight she found herself standing on the edge of Pier 17, the cold ocean breeze whipping through her hair as she waited for whoever had sent the message to show themselves. She was armed, of course, a small pistol tucked into the waistband of her leather jacket, but she didn't expect to need it. If this was a trap, she would see it coming. The man who stepped out of the shadows was younger than she expected, probably in his late 20s, with sharp features and a confident smirk that immediately set her on edge. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a black hoodie, but there was something about the way he carried himself that told her he wasn't just some random kid looking to make a name for himself. He had the air of someone who had seen things, done things, and walked away without a scratch. "Veronica Blake," he said, his voice smooth and self-assured. "It's an honor to finally meet you." She didn't respond right away, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You've got 5 seconds to tell me who you are and why I shouldn't put a bullet in your head." The man chuckled, completely unfazed by her threat. "My name's Lucas Kane, and if you wanted to shoot me you would have done it already. I'm here because I can help you, and because, let's be honest, you need me." Veronica raised an eyebrow, her hand resting on the pistol at her hip. "I don't need anyone, especially not some cocky kid who thinks he knows more than he does." Lucas's smirk widened. "Oh, I know plenty. Like the fact that you've got the LAPD breathing down your neck after that armored truck job. Or that your hacker, Alex, has been getting sloppy, leaving breadcrumbs that even a rookie could follow. And let's not forget about Ethan. He's a loose cannon, and you know it. It's only a matter of time before he does something stupid and brings the whole operation down." Veronica's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. He wasn't wrong, and that was what bothered her the most. She prided herself on being in control, on always being one step ahead. But Lucas had just walked in and laid bare all the cracks in her carefully constructed empire. "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice cold and measured. "I want in," Lucas said simply. "I've been watching you for a while now and I like your style. You're smart, ruthless, and you don't let anyone stand in your way. But you're also vulnerable. You've got too many moving parts, too many people who don't know how to cover their tracks. That's where I come in. I can clean up your messes, tighten your operation, and make sure no one ever gets close to you again." Veronica crossed her arms, her eyes never leaving his. "And what's in it for you?" Lucas shrugged. "The same thing that's in it for you. Money, power, and the satisfaction of knowing we're untouchable. Plus, I've got my own reasons for wanting to take down the system. Let's just say I've got a score to settle." She didn't trust him, not yet. But there was something about Lucas that intrigued her. He was smart, confident, and clearly capable. And as much as she hated to admit it, he was right. Her crew had been getting sloppy, and the pressure from the authorities was mounting. If she didn't adapt, she would fall. And Veronica Blake didn't fall. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "You're in, but let me make one thing clear. You screw me over, and I'll make you wish you'd never been born." Lucas grinned, extending a hand. "Deal." From that moment on, Lucas became an integral part of the crew. He wasn't just a tech genius, though his skills in hacking and surveillance were unmatched. He was also a strategist, someone who could see the bigger picture and anticipate problems before they arose. He streamlined their operations, tightening security and eliminating unnecessary risks. He even managed to track down and erase the digital trail that Alex had left behind, effectively wiping their slate clean. But Lucas wasn't just a behind-the-scenes player, he had a knack for getting his hands dirty when the situation called for it. Whether it was cracking a safe, sweet-talking a mark, or even pulling a trigger, he proved time and time again that he was more than capable of holding his own. And while Ethan was initially wary of him, seeing him as a threat to his position as Veronica's right-hand man, the two eventually developed a grudging respect for each other. For Veronica, Lucas was both a blessing and a curse. He made her operation stronger, more efficient, and more secure, but he also made her uneasy. He was too smart, too ambitious, and too good at what he did. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing his own game, one that she wasn't privy to. And while she appreciated his contributions, she kept him at arm's length, always watching, always waiting for the moment when he would show his true colors. The arrival of Lucas Kane marked a new chapter in Veronica's criminal empire. With his help, they pulled off bigger, more daring jobs, amassing a fortune that seemed untouchable. But it also marked the beginning of a new kind of tension, one that would eventually force Veronica to confront the question she had been avoiding all along. How far was she willing to go, and who could she really trust? Internal conflict. Ethan's doubts about Veronica. Ethan Cole had always been loyal to Veronica Blake. From the moment they met, he had been drawn to her. Her confidence, her intelligence, her ability to see the world as a chessboard and move the pieces exactly where she wanted them. She was the mastermind, the one who always had a plan, and Ethan had been more than willing to play his part. But loyalty, like everything else in their world, had its limits. And as the stakes grew higher and the risks more dangerous, Ethan began to wonder if Veronica was leading them toward greatness or destruction. It started with the armored truck heist. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off that day. The explosions, the chaos, the close calls, it had all been too messy, too risky. Veronica had assured him that everything was under control, but Ethan wasn't so sure. And then there was Lucas Kane. The new guy had shown up out of nowhere, claiming to have all the answers, and Veronica had let him in without hesitation. That wasn't like her. Veronica didn't trust people easily, and yet she had handed Lucas the keys to their operation as if he were some kind of savior. It didn't sit right with Ethan. The doubts festered, growing stronger with each passing day. Ethan started noticing things, small things, but things that didn't add up. Veronica was spending more time with Lucas, whispering in corners and making decisions without consulting the rest of the crew. She was keeping secrets, and Ethan didn't like it. He had always been her right-hand man, the one she relied on, but now it felt like he was being pushed aside. And the more he thought about it, the more he began to wonder if Veronica was hiding something that could get them all killed. One night, after a particularly tense meeting at the safe house, Ethan decided he couldn't keep his suspicions to himself any longer. He waited until the others had left, Lucas, Marcus, Jenna, and Alex, before confronting Veronica. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in her hand and a stack of documents spread out in front of her. She didn't look up as Ethan entered the room, but he could tell she knew he was there. "We need to talk," Ethan said, his voice low and serious. Veronica finally looked up, her green eyes sharp and calculating. "About what? About you. About Lucas. About what the hell is going on with this crew?" She raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Ethan snapped, his frustration boiling over. "Ever since Lucas showed up, things have been different. You've been different. You're keeping secrets, making decisions without telling me or anyone else. That's not how we do things, Veronica." Veronica sighed, setting her glass down on the table. "Ethan, I don't have time for this. We're in the middle of planning the biggest job we've ever done, and you're worried about Lucas? He's not the problem. You are." Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Don't turn this around on me. I've been with you since the beginning. I put my life on the line for you more times than I can count. And now you're acting like I'm some kind of liability? What the hell happened to us, Veronica?" She stood up, her expression cold and unyielding. "What happened is that you're letting your emotions get in the way. This isn't about us, Ethan. It's about the job. It's about survival. Lucas is here because we need him. He's good at what he does, and he's helping us stay ahead of the cops. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had always known that Veronica was ruthless, that she would do whatever it took to stay on top. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her question his place in the crew, it was almost too much to bear. "You really think I don't belong here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Veronica hesitated just for a moment, and in that moment Ethan saw something in her eyes. Doubt, fear, maybe even regret. But then it was gone, replaced by the steely resolve that had always defined her. "I think you need to decide where your loyalties lie," she said, "because if you can't trust me, then we've got a bigger problem than Lucas." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to believe her, to trust her the way he always had, but something had changed between them, and he didn't know if they could ever go back to the way things were. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Veronica alone with her whiskey and her secrets. Over the next few weeks, the tension between them only grew. Ethan started watching Veronica more closely, looking for signs that she was hiding something. He noticed the way she and Lucas would exchange glances during meetings, the way she would disappear for hours at a time without telling anyone where she was going. He even started to wonder if she was planning to cut him out of the operation entirely. The breaking point came during a planning session for their next job, a high-stakes casino heist that would make or break their crew. Veronica was outlining the plan, her voice calm and confident as she explained the details. But Ethan wasn't listening. He was too busy watching Lucas, who was sitting next to her, nodding along as if he were the one in charge. When the meeting ended, Ethan pulled Veronica aside. "I need to know the truth," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Are you planning to cut me out? Is that what this is about?" Veronica's eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Ethan snapped. "I see the way you look at Lucas. I see the way you trust him more than you trust me. If you're planning to get rid of me, just say it." Veronica's expression softened, just for a moment. "Ethan, you're being paranoid. No one is cutting you out. But if you keep acting like this, you're going to make it impossible for me to trust you." "Trust me." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You're the one who's been lying to me. You're the one who's been keeping secrets. How am I supposed to trust you when I don't even know what you're planning anymore?" Veronica didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that everything I'm doing is for the good of the crew. If you can't do that, then maybe you're right. Maybe you don't belong here." Ethan pulled away, his heart pounding. He wanted to believe her, but the doubts wouldn't go away. And as he walked out of the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end. For him, for Veronica, and for everything they had built together. The final murder. Ethan's death. Ethan Cole had always known that the life he chose was dangerous. He had seen death up close, felt its cold breath on the back of his neck more times than he could count. But he never thought it would come for him like this, not at the hands of someone he trusted, someone he had once called family. And yet as he lay on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, blood pooling beneath him, he realized that trust had been his fatal mistake. The events leading up to Ethan's death had been brewing for weeks. The tension between him and Veronica Blake had reached a breaking point, and the arrival of Lucas Kane had only made things worse. Ethan's doubts about Veronica's loyalty, her motives, and her growing reliance on Lucas had consumed him. He had tried to confront her, to make her see reason, but every conversation ended the same way, with Veronica shutting him down, her icy resolve leaving no room for compromise. Ethan had always been her right-hand man, but now he felt like an outsider, a liability in a crew he had helped build. The final job was supposed to be their biggest score yet, a high-stakes casino heist that would set them up for life. Veronica had spent months planning every detail, and the crew had been working tirelessly to execute her vision. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The plan was too risky, too ambitious, and Veronica was keeping too many secrets. He had tried to voice his concerns, but she had dismissed him, accusing him of letting his emotions cloud his judgment. It was the same argument they had been having for weeks, and Ethan was tired of it. The night of the heist, Ethan made a decision. He wasn't going to let Veronica's recklessness get them all killed. If she wouldn't listen to him, he would take matters into his own hands. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he knew Veronica was hiding something that could change everything. So while the rest of the crew was busy preparing for the job, Ethan broke into Veronica's private office at the safe house. He knew it was a risk, but he didn't care. He had to know the truth. What he found was worse than he could have imagined. Hidden in a locked drawer was a file, documents, photos, and notes that painted a picture of betrayal. Veronica had been working with Lucas to cut him out of the operation. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe even months, and the casino heist was just a cover. The real plan was to use the chaos of the job to disappear, leaving Ethan and the rest of the crew to take the fall. Ethan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his mind racing. He had always known Veronica was ruthless. But this was something else entirely. Before he could process what he had found, the door to the office swung open. Veronica stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her was Lucas, his ever-present smirk replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Ethan's heart sank. He had been caught. "What the hell are you doing, Ethan?" Veronica asked, her voice calm but laced with danger. Ethan held up the file, his eyes blazing with anger. "I could ask you the same thing. What is this, Veronica? Were you planning to sell me out? To leave me behind like I'm nothing?" Veronica stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the floor. "You weren't supposed to see that." "That's all you have to say?" Ethan snapped, his voice rising. "After everything I've done for you, after everything we've been through, you were just going to throw me away? Why, Veronica? Why? Veronica sighed, crossing her arms. Because you've become a liability, Ethan. You're emotional, unpredictable, and you've been questioning me at every turn. I can't afford that. Not now. Ethan shook his head, his disbelief turning to rage. You're unbelievable. I've been loyal to you since day one. I've put my life on the line for you, and this is how you repay me? By stabbing me in the back? Lucas stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. You should have stayed in line, Ethan. You brought this on yourself. Ethan's eyes darted to Lucas, then back to Veronica. So that's it? You're just going to let him do your dirty work? Or are you going to pull the trigger yourself? Veronica didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Lucas and gave a small nod. That was all it took. Lucas drew his gun, the metallic click echoing in the small room. Ethan's instincts kicked in and he lunged for his own weapon, but he was too slow. The gunshot was deafening, the impact sending him crashing to the floor. Pain exploded in his chest as he clutched at the wound, his vision blurring. Veronica crouched down beside him, her expression cold and detached. I didn't want it to end like this, Ethan. But you gave me no choice. Ethan tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His breaths were shallow, each one more labored than the last. He looked up at Veronica, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and something else, something that almost looked like sadness. And then, just like that, he was gone. Lucas holstered his gun, glancing down at the body with a look of mild annoyance. Well, that was messy. Veronica stood, her face a mask of indifference. Clean it up. We have a job to finish. As Lucas dragged Ethan's body out of the room, Veronica turned back to the desk, her eyes lingering on the open file. For a moment she felt a pang of something, guilt maybe, or regret, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for weakness in her world. Ethan had made his choice, and so had she. The casino heist went off without a hitch, just as Veronica had planned, but for the crew things would never be the same. Ethan's absence was felt by everyone, though no one dared to question it. Veronica told them he had gone rogue, that he had been planning to betray them, and most of them believed her. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Ethan had been loyal to the end, and his death was a reminder of just how far Veronica was willing to go to protect her empire. For Veronica, Ethan's death was both a victory and a loss. She had eliminated a threat, secured her position, and proven once again that she was willing to do whatever it took to stay on top. But as she sat alone in her penthouse, staring out at the city lights, she couldn't shake the memory of his face in those final moments. He had trusted her, and she had betrayed him. And no amount of money or power could erase the weight of that betrayal. In the end, Ethan's death wasn't just the end of a partnership. It was the beginning of the end for Veronica Blake, because no matter how far she ran or how high she climbed, she couldn't escape the ghosts of the people she had left behind. And Ethan's ghost, she knew, would haunt her forever. The FBI manhunt. The FBI had been circling Veronica Blake and her crew for months, but after the casino heist and the mysterious disappearance of Ethan Cole, the agency's focus sharpened into a relentless pursuit. What had once been a scattered investigation, plagued by dead ends and false leads, was now a full-scale manhunt. Veronica's name was whispered in every briefing room, her face plastered across every bulletin board. She had become the FBI's most wanted, and they weren't going to stop until they brought her down. The man leading the charge was Special Agent Nathan Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for taking down high-profile criminals. Carter wasn't just good at his job, he was obsessed with it. He had been tracking Veronica since the bank heist, and every step of the way, she had managed to stay one step ahead of him. But the casino job had changed everything. It wasn't just the audacity of the crime or the sheer amount of money stolen, it was the trail of destruction she had left in her wake. Ethan's death, though officially unconfirmed, had sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, and Carter knew it was only a matter of time before Veronica's empire began to crumble. The first break in the case came from an unlikely source, Alex, the crew's hacker. Alex had always been the weakest link in Veronica's operation. He was brilliant with computers, but lacked the cold, ruthless edge that defined the rest of the crew. After Ethan's death, Alex had started to crack under the pressure. He had been drinking more, making mistakes, and leaving behind digital breadcrumbs that even a rookie agent could follow. Carter's team had been monitoring Alex for weeks, and when they finally caught him trying to withdraw a large sum of money from an offshore account, they pounced. The interrogation was brutal. Alex tried to hold out, but he wasn't built for this kind of pressure. Carter played him like a fiddle, using a combination of threats, promises, and psychological manipulation to break him down. By the end of the first day, Alex had spilled everything he knew, the locations of safe houses, the details of past jobs, and most importantly the crew's next target. It was a gold shipment being transported by train, a job so ambitious that even Carter was impressed by the audacity of it. With Alex's intel in hand, the FBI launched a massive operation to intercept the crew. Carter knew that Veronica wouldn't go down without a fight, and he wasn't taking any chances. He assembled a task force of the best agents in the Bureau, along with SWAT teams, surveillance drones, and even a helicopter unit. The plan was simple: let Veronica and her crew make their move, then swoop in and take them down before they could escape. It was a high-risk operation, but Carter was confident. He had studied Veronica's every move and he knew how she thought. This time, she wouldn't get away. The night of the heist, the tension was palpable. The train carrying the gold was heavily guarded, with armed security personnel stationed in every car. But Veronica had planned for this. She and Lucas had spent weeks studying the train's route, identifying weak points, and devising a plan to neutralize the guards without drawing too much attention. The crew was smaller now, just Veronica, Lucas, Marcus, and Jenna, but they were more focused than ever. They knew this was their last big score, the job that would either make them untouchable or destroy them completely. The heist began like clockwork. Marcus planted explosives on the tracks, forcing the train to stop in a remote stretch of desert. Jenna, the getaway driver, positioned the van nearby, ready to make a quick escape. Lucas and Veronica boarded the train, their movements swift and precise as they overpowered the guards and began loading the gold into duffel bags. Everything was going according to plan, until the FBI showed up. The first sign of trouble was the sound of helicopter blades slicing through the night air. Veronica froze, her heart pounding as she looked out the window and saw the searchlights sweeping across the desert. "We've got company," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Move faster!" Lucas cursed under his breath, his hands working frantically to secure the last of the gold. "How the hell did they find us?" "I don't know," Veronica replied, her mind racing, "but we're not sticking around to find out. Marcus, blow the backup charges, now!" Marcus's voice crackled over the radio. "On it!" The explosion rocked the train, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the sky. It was a diversion, designed to buy them time, but it wasn't enough. The FBI was already closing in, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust as they sped toward the train. Carter was in the lead SUV, his eyes fixed on the scene ahead. He could see the figures moving on the train, the flash of gunfire as the guards tried to fight back. He grabbed his radio and barked orders to his team. "Move in, take them alive if you can, but don't let them escape." The next few minutes were chaos. Veronica and Lucas fought their way off the train, their guns blazing as they tried to hold off the advancing agents. Marcus and Jenna were already in the van, shouting for them to hurry. "We've got to go now!" Jenna yelled, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Veronica and Lucas made a break for it, sprinting toward the van as bullets whizzed past them. They were almost there when Lucas stumbled, a bullet catching him in the leg. He went down hard, clutching his thigh as blood seeped through his fingers. "Go!" he shouted. "Leave me!" "Not a chance!" Veronica snapped, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet. Together they staggered toward the van, the sound of sirens growing louder with every step. They made it to the van just as the FBI closed in. Jenna floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as they sped away. But the agents were right behind them, their vehicles forming a relentless convoy. Carter was in the lead, his jaw set in determination. He wasn't going to let them get away, not this time. The chase was a blur of flashing lights, roaring engines, and gunfire. Veronica barked orders to Jenna, her mind working overtime to find a way out. "Take the next left! Head for the canyon!" Jenna obeyed, the van careening around a sharp turn and onto a narrow dirt road. The canyon loomed ahead, its jagged cliffs casting long shadows in the moonlight. It was a desperate move, but Veronica was out of options. She knew the terrain better than the FBI, and if they could just make it through the canyon, they might have a chance. But Carter wasn't giving up. He ordered the helicopter to cut them off, its searchlight blinding as it hovered above the canyon entrance. "They're trapped," he said into his radio. "Move in and box them out." Veronica saw the trap too late. The van skidded to a halt as FBI vehicles blocked the road ahead, their agents stepping out with guns drawn. Behind them, more vehicles closed in, cutting off their escape. They were surrounded. "Get out of the van!" Carter shouted through a megaphone. "Hands in the air! This is your only chance!" Veronica looked around, her mind racing. She could see the fear in Jenna's eyes, the pain on Lucas's face, the grim determination in Marcus's expression. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. But Veronica wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "We fight," she said, her voice steady. "We don't go down without a fight." The crew nodded, their weapons at the ready. And as the FBI closed in, the final showdown began, a chaotic, desperate battle that would mark the end of Veronica Blake's reign and the beginning of her legend. The endgame, the fall of Veronica Blake. Veronica Blake had always believed she was untouchable. For years, she had outsmarted the police, the FBI, and even her own crew when necessary. She had built an empire on lies, manipulation, and blood, and she had done it all with a calm, calculated precision that made her seem invincible. But in the end, even Veronica couldn't outrun the consequences of her choices. Her fall wasn't sudden, it was a slow, inevitable unraveling. The culmination of every betrayal, every risk, and every decision she had made to stay on top. And when it finally came, it was as spectacular as it was tragic. The final moments of Veronica's reign began in the canyon, where the FBI had cornered her and what was left of her crew. The firefight was brutal, a chaotic clash of bullets and desperation. Veronica fought like a woman possessed, her mind racing with strategies and contingencies as she tried to find a way out, but the odds were stacked against her. Lucas was injured, Marcus was running low on ammunition, and Jenna was panicking behind the wheel of the van. The FBI had them surrounded, and Special Agent Nathan Carter wasn't about to let her slip through his fingers again. "Veronica Blake!" Carter's voice boomed through the canyon, amplified by a megaphone. "This is over! Drop your weapons and surrender now, or we will use lethal force!" Veronica ignored him, her eyes scanning the terrain for an escape route. She had always been good at thinking on her feet, but this time, there was no way out. The canyon walls loomed high above them, and the FBI had blocked every possible exit. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to give in. Surrender wasn't an option. Not for her. "Marcus, cover me!" she shouted, grabbing a duffel bag filled with gold and slinging it over her shoulder. "Jenna, get the van ready to move." "Move where?" Jenna yelled, her voice trembling. "We're trapped, Veronica! There's nowhere to go!" "Just do it!" Veronica snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. But even as she barked orders, Veronica knew the truth. This was the end. She had pushed her luck too far, taken one risk too many, and now it was all coming crashing down around her. For the first time in her life she felt the sting of defeat, and it burned like fire. The turning point came when Lucas, still bleeding from the gunshot wound in his leg, collapsed behind the van. Veronica rushed to his side, her hands slick with his blood as she tried to pull him to his feet. "Get up!" she hissed, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. "We're not done yet!" Lucas looked up at her, his face pale and drawn. "It's over, Veronica," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You have to let it go." "I don't let anything go!" she shot back, her grip tightening on his arm. "We're getting out of here, all of us!" But Lucas shook his head, a faint, bitter smile playing on his lips. "Not this time." Before Veronica could respond, the FBI made their move. Flashbangs exploded around them, the blinding light and deafening noise disorienting her as agents swarmed the area. Marcus tried to hold them off, but he was quickly overwhelmed, his weapon knocked from his hands as he was tackled to the ground. Jenna, frozen with fear, didn't even try to run. She was dragged from the van, her screams echoing through the canyon as she was handcuffed and hauled away. Veronica fought until the very end. She fired her weapon until it was empty, then grabbed another from the van and kept going. She moved with the precision of a trained soldier, her every action calculated to buy herself more time, but it wasn't enough. The FBI was too well prepared, too determined, and they had the numbers on their side. One by one her crew fell, until she was the only one left standing. Carter was the one who finally brought her down. He had been watching her from a distance, studying her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. When it came, he didn't hesitate. He moved in quickly, his weapon trained on her as he shouted, "Drop the gun, Veronica! It's over!" Veronica turned to face him, her eyes blazing with defiance. "It's never over," she said, her voice cold and steady. "Not for me." For a moment it seemed like she might try to fight her way out, even with no ammunition left and nowhere to run. But then, something in her shifted. She lowered the gun, her shoulders slumping as the weight of everything she had done finally caught up with her. She looked at Carter, her expression unreadable, and then she dropped the weapon to the ground. The agents moved in quickly, pinning her arms behind her back and snapping handcuffs around her wrists. Carter watched as they led her away, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. He had spent years chasing her, and now, finally, it was over. The trial of Veronica Blake was one of the most sensational in recent history. The media dubbed her the Queen of Crime, and every detail of her life and crimes was dissected in the court of public opinion. The prosecution painted her as a cold, calculating mastermind who had manipulated everyone around her for her own gain. The defense tried to argue that she was a victim of circumstance, a product of a broken system that had forced her to turn to crime. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the jury took less than a day to reach a verdict: guilty on all counts. Veronica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was sent to a maximum security facility where she spent her days in isolation, her once powerful empire reduced to nothing more than a memory. For the first time in her life she was powerless, and the realization was almost more than she could bear. But even in prison, Veronica remained a legend. Her name was whispered in the halls, her story passed from inmate to inmate like a cautionary tale. Some admired her for her intelligence and ambition, while others despised her for the lives she had destroyed. But no one could deny that she had left her mark on the world. As for Veronica, she spent her days replaying the choices that had led her to this point. She thought about Ethan, about Lucas, about all the people she had betrayed, and all the lives she had ruined. She thought about the empire she had built, and the price she had paid to keep it. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. In the end, Veronica Blake's story was one of ambition, betrayal, and the high cost of power. She had risen to the top, only to fall harder than anyone could have imagined, and though she had lost everything, her name would live on, a reminder of what happens when you play the game too long and push your luck too far.